So today in this report, I've invited your staff to share stories about their ministry, and I want to begin with our youth ministry coordinator, Sarah Hausken.
Well, good morning, everybody. I get to tell you a story today. I want to tell you a story about someone in our synod who has embodied our theme of embracing God's mission and equipping God's people. I want to tell you about our outgoing LYO, Lutheran Youth Organization president, Cole Wolcher. Cole was raised by his mom and his grandpa, and he grew up largely without a father. That left a large hole in his life. But Cole was a member of Vinji Lutheran Church in Wilmer, and Vinji was a place where he felt cared for and at home. When Cole was in junior high, his grandpa died, and Cole really struggled. He doubted God, and he stopped going to church. He even attempted to take his own life. After quite a while, Cole's mom convinced him to go back to church. Cole talks about walking into that building and being greeted and welcomed as if he had never left. Through his congregation, Cole felt the depth of God's love. He started to become more involved in his faith family, and eventually he went to a junior high youth gathering. At that gathering, he experienced a style of worship that he had never seen before. Youth were dancing and singing at the top of their lungs, and there were a lot of them. Cole realized that the church was larger than his congregation. After coming to the senior high youth gathering, Cole was elected to the Lutheran Youth Organization and eventually became the president. Cole thrived in that atmosphere. He said that he felt like he was accepted for who he was and was able to form close relationships with both youth and adults who all cared deeply about sharing God's love. So Cole went from doubting God and feeling hopeless about life to leading a board of people to share the love of Christ in amazing ways. Cole personifies this call that we have to embrace God's mission and equip God's people. And I'm grateful to serve alongside him and the many others who do the same around our church. Now, as youth ministry coordinator, people often ask me how to get more youth involved at church. They want to know what specific activities and programs will attract youth. Well, it is very, very simple. What youth want from our church is a community where they feel completely loved and completely accepted for who they are. When they find this, you will not be able to keep them away. In this kind of community, youth are known and cherished for who they are now, not for who they might be. Their gifts are recognized, named, and nourished, and they are given opportunities to share their gifts and offer their perspectives. There's no program that can do this. It's simply us, the people of God, loving and accepting each other just as God has loved us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your leadership. And I'll pull up our next slide. So, and that's our LYO board. And I'm going to invite Catherine Skuglin forward, and she's going to share a story from her world. Catherine's new on our staff, if you've come to the assembly today, and we're grateful for the gifts God sent to be with us through her.
When I first started thinking about applying for this position, I asked Joyce Piper what was her favorite part of the work that she did as synod minister. And without hesitation, she said it was talking with potential candidates as they discerned how God was calling them to be faithful servants in the world and whether or not that discernment would lead them to rostered ministry in the future. And as I've become immersed in this work, I understand what she meant. And I've had the opportunity to talk and walk with some amazing people as they go through the candidacy process. Just a few weeks ago, we had our spring candidacy interviews, and I'd like to introduce you to some of the people, well, all of the people, that I met that day who are at various stages in the process and who each have a unique story to share. In the upper left-hand corner is Alex Becker, a distance learner at Luther Seminary who flew in from South Carolina, where he's been living and working while he studies. Bad weather delayed his flight. He almost missed his connection and landed so late the evening before he wasn't sure he'd be able to make it to the interview. And so he drove from the Twin Cities early Thursday morning, interviewed, drove back to the cities to catch another flight, and was home in South Carolina by Thursday night. He had a positive endorsement interview, and he'll be starting his internship in Owatonna at the end of August. Next to Alex, we have Gabin Gitangwa, originally a Catholic priest who left the priesthood, got married, moved to the United States, lives in St. Cloud with his wife and children. And right now, he's working as a chaplain at a children's home for at-risk youth run by Catholic Charities in St. Cloud. Gabin is fluent in English, French, Portuguese, was approved at his interview, and is now looking to serve as an ELCA pastor at a congregation, hopefully in our synod. Then we have Ann Bjorklund, who came for her entrance interview and who is also from the St. Cloud area. Ann is one of our LGBTQ candidates who has a heart for the gospel and a deep yearning to proclaim God's love to all of God's people. When the time comes for her to complete candidacy, she's open to God's leading spirit and is excited to see where God's call will take her next. Underneath is Paul Bravender, another candidate who received a positive entrance interview. Paul has had a rather circuitous journey, has traveled, worked, and lived all over the United States, and despite all of the different careers he's had, he's always felt a pull to something else. Finally, understanding that pull was leading, where it was leading, and is now ready to begin his studies at Luther Seminary. Mindy Chikala, next to Paul, was serving at Zion Lutheran Church in Litchfield, and then first studied to become an associate in ministry, was commissioned as a minister of Christian education and faith formation at Zion, but she knew that God's Spirit was continuing to call her to something else. And so now she is a part of the team program. She serves as a vicar at First in Cosmos and Beckville in Litchfield. Mindy had a successful endorsement interview and will begin her internship while she continues her studies at Wartburg Seminary. And then finally, we have Kent Crumwhitey, who has been serving as a synodically authorized minister at Bethany in Storden and Trinity in Jeffers, and who was also a distance learner at Luther. Kent said his candidacy journey actually started over 50 years ago, and he was thrilled to finally graduate in May with an MDiv from Luther. At his interview, Kent was approved for ordination and is also looking for a call, hopefully in our synod. When I look at these candidates and hear their stories, I am amazed at the various ways and the variety of people God uses to fulfill God's mission as rostered leaders. And as you heard Dr. Steinke say earlier, there are other potential candidates out there. So I ask you to keep your eyes and your ears and your hearts open to discover who else God is calling. And I also ask you to keep all of our current and future candidates in your prayers.
Thank you, Catherine. And now I invite Pastor Linda Pedersen to come and share her story.
Well, my story is your story. As I watched Sarah Huskin and then I saw Catherine Skoglund, although Sarah Huskin has been on the Senate staff longer than I have, feeling like I'm the more mature member of this staff at this point, having had the privilege of working alongside Bishop John for over 12 years now. So during that time, I have seen that there might have been a few changes that have happened in our Senate over these past 12, almost 13 years. When I first came to southwestern Minnesota, I remember I came from the St. Paul Area Synod, and I don't know if you know anything about the St. Paul Area Synod or the Minneapolis Area Synod, but in those two synods, they seem to have pastors kind of stacked up like cordwood waiting for calls. And then I came to southwestern Minnesota in my first year here. I think there were 55 openings when I came to serve on this staff. And I remember saying to folks, you know what? If you're a pastor and you're still living and breathing, you're preaching somewhere. And that's changed a little bit. We now have, as you have heard from Bishop John, about 30 openings, 30 pastoral changes that happen in congregations every year. Pastor Catherine and I have a chance and a privilege of working with call committees during that time. So I wanted to tell you a call committee story today. So in that process, during this time, thank you, Bishop John, I find that when I go out to visit with call committees, I get kind of one reaction or another, and then sometimes in between. So sometimes I go out to visit with call committees, especially after there's been maybe a difficult transition, shall we say, and the call committee will look at me and say, do you think we'll ever get another pastor here? So that's kind of one extreme. Then the other extreme is the congregations who anticipate, like maybe the school board, that there'll be applicants and stacks of pastors who are just waiting to come to their beautiful town, and will anticipate that our Senate office will just simply load those files up and bring them for the call committee to explore their 30-plus candidates who might anticipate serving as the pastor in their community, and then somewhere in between. So I want to tell you particularly today I want to tell you a story about Emmanuel and Clara City. Because working with Emmanuel and Clara City's call committee was one of those first categories that I talked about. The first time I went to visit with their call committee, I got that question, do you think anyone will ever come to serve here? And of course, I am the eternal optimist. Of course we'll be able to find candidates to come and serve here. But the important thing was not my work, but their work. We asked congregational call committees to be prayerful, to be patient, and to be good communicators. And this group got busy and did their work. They got busy and they put together a PowerPoint presentation that started out with a slide that you see in front of you. This is a very classic looking church building. But they also interviewed their congregation. They gathered a number of pieces of information. They asked questions of their congregation. Like, for example, how do we feel, what do we think about the pastor living in the parsonage? Is that a deal breaker for us? Or would we be open to other possibilities? And they gathered that information and they put it together. They put it together in a PowerPoint and they said, send this to potential candidates. But they didn't stop there. They decided that they would make a video about their congregation and about their community and why a candidate might come and serve among them and to present themselves to that candidate through that video production. And it was about a 4.5-minute video. And I think we've got a clip of it to show you.
We enjoy having a little humor in our service. We enjoy our music. No one gets too upset if babies are crying or kids are fussing, because we're all in this together.
The video started out with the trains moving through Clara City, and then a number of segments about how we're all in it together. I sent those to candidates, and a number of candidates interviewed with this congregation, and soon they narrowed their search to Pastor Joel Gunningsman, and he came from a congregation in Iowa and to serve with them. And we had the privilege of installing him in the early spring. And the congregation found out he was a baseball fan, so the first day he showed up and the day I showed up to install him, you may notice they all have baseball gear on. And his installation luncheon included nachos and cheese and grilled hot dogs and all of those wonderful things. But the story didn't end with his installation. About 2 months later, the call committee chair called me, and I thought, well, forgive me, I hear more bad news than good news sometimes. You may be surprised by that. So when the call committee chairperson called me about 2 months later, I answered my cell phone. I knew who it was because all of these committee chairs become speed dial on my phone. So I answered the phone, and he said to me, as I'm taking a deep breath and my heart is going like this, he said, I just called to thank you. I just called to thank you because we're just so happy with our new pastor, and we so appreciated the partnership that we had with you and our Southwestern Minnesota Synod through that process. Yeah, thank you, thank you. It is tearfully a privilege to serve alongside you because you are the saints and we are the saints together. Thank you.
So I hope as you're hearing these stories that you realize that you're there because of your support of your synod, and we're thankful to serve. I invite Pastor Larry Stringy to come forward now. As Larry's coming to the microphone, I would just want to teach you something about Larry's position. He's actually an ELCA staff member nested in your synod office. His compensation comes from the church-wide organization, and he wants to make a point about you being there.
That's right. Thank you, Bishop John. One of my favorite terms that I've learned from presiding Bishop Eaton are these words: we are church together. Would you say them with me? We are church together. And what I've learned in that is that it fits well with the vision that I believe that the Apostle Paul had at the end of the 3rd chapter of what we call the book of Ephesians, or the letter to the people at Ephesus, when he says, now to God, who by the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly more than all we could ever ask or imagine. To God be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen. We are church together for the sake of the world. And when I think about that, I think about the stories of the way that we are church together. We heard just a little while ago from Pastor Laura Ossie and the way that River of Hope has done its ministry. And we've got a whole bunch of fun ministries that are going on in this synod. I'm going to come back to River of Hope in a few moments. One of my favorite stories is a story that takes place in Montrose, Minnesota. Back a few years ago, Bishop Anderson came to me and said, you know, that east side of our synod is really growing. We need to look at something over there. So we started taking a look at the statistics, and we found out that this little town called Montrose was over on the east side, and he said, who does that belong to? Well, we had to go to our ELCA churchwide and find out that it was kind of in what would be nobody's land. It was between the two synods, so we decided that Bishop Ann Svenningson and Bishop Anderson would wrestle for it, and, you know, no. But it was decided that Montrose would come to our southwestern Minnesota synod. So I remember going there for the first time and seeing the vision that Pastor Kimberly Buffy, who serves as a bivocational mission developer and chiropractor in her work, along with her husband Perry. And she said, you know, Larry, I think there's real potential for this place. And she showed me this place. And I said to her, Kimberly, what are you talking about? I mean, it was a dump. Well, it wasn't long before she brought this worshiping community together, and they started thinking about ways that they could reach out to this community of Montrose that I forgot to mention had grown by 3,000% in the last 10 years. And they started to transform this place into what they now call Grace Place Ministry Center in Montrose. And I was there the other night for the appreciation dinner. And you should see the work that has taken place inside of this place. I hope that you'll go there and you'll take a look and see what people who came there and saw this vision and heard this vision that mission developer Pastor Kimberly Buffy had. This is a person, by the way, that is featured last year at God's Work Our Hands Day. She had the vision of bringing together people from a bunch of congregations. And so there were 8 different groups that went out into the Montrose community, and the ELCA picked up on this, and you can actually see them featured in the God's Work Our Hands video that came out of that. It's one of the stories, because we are church together. Let's hear that. We are church together. We are church together when Bethlehem Lutheran Church in St. Cloud, a congregation that's been around for a long time, looked out into the community that Jody Harpstead talked about, that community of St. Cloud, and saw that that community was changing. And so they began an African ministry. And this picture that you see before you right now features 3 leaders that are partnering with our partner Agora, and they are there being developed into leaders for this church. You see them pictured there, Emmanuel, Samson, and David. Liberian and Sudanese leaders who are being developed for ministry through Agora, and doing that through Bethlehem Lutheran Church in St. Cloud, receiving partnership funds that we send to our synod and then is shared with our churchwide ministry, and those dollars come back because we are church together. That's right, we're church together when we go to Paz Esperanza. And we see this marvelous leader, also a bivocational person, Marco Curiel, who has been in the team ministry program for a number of years and is coming to that place. He's a synodically authorized minister. But the thing that I love about Marco is that he is an evangelist. He loves to talk to people about Jesus. Marco was here. Are you here today, Marco? Are you still back there? He was over there yesterday. Maybe he's gone back. But Marco is leading this community of Paz Esperanza, receiving funding from the Lakeland Conference, from other places, ministries here, or congregations in our synod, but also from our churchwide system, because we are church together. And he's being developed as this leader. Well, we've already heard from River of Hope. I was privileged to be there on May 15th, 2016, when this group of people gathered together, celebrating what Pastor Laura Ossie, mission developer Laura Ossie, talked about in that congregation that celebrates milestones, but also says those beautiful words, we go out to transform lives through Jesus Christ. That's what they do. That's what we do together, because We are church together. We are church together, and I love this photo, by the way, because they're doing a toast, by the way, with their root beer floats. They do hope floats. Well, this final picture is one of my favorite ministries that's being developed in our synod, and that is a Laotian exploration that we're doing in the St. Cloud area. A couple of months at Atonement Lutheran, who's welcomed them in to use their space and be partners with them. And I went to their Bible study that takes place at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday afternoon. Here's a picture of some of the leaders that were there together. But my eyes filled with tears when they began to sing. How great thou art. How great thou art. We are church together for the sake of the world. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Larry. Now, another ELCA staff member who serves in your synod is a woman named Amy Bigot, who's not able to be here. If she was here, she'd make fun of her name. And it has to do with the fact that the people in New Ulm, where I resided for many years, could not pronounce French. So they finally just, instead of saying Bigot, they went to Bigot as the way to put it bluntly. But Amy is available to work with your church. She serves in what's called the Western Minnesota Plan Giving Partnership, that involves camps, social service agencies, and our synods, and the ELCA churchwide organization. She's willing to come and talk to you about the Fund Day, which is a great way to receive steady income as a part of an endowment. She's happy to come and talk about legacy planning for you and your family, or to help your congregations begin to open a conversation about endowments. She's there to help you as an unpaid advocate for you in the process of planning out how to use your estate and use some of the amazing tools that are available for estate planning that it has taken me years to understand. But Amy's not able to be here because she has another family commitment today, but I just want to give thanks to God for her as well as just name some of the other folks that serve on your synod staff. We have conference ministers who care for 5 of our conferences. They're great colleagues. They work 4 to 5 hours a week, and they've been pivotal in helping us work with a lighter footprint of staffing. And I'm going to invite them to stand, but we're going to hold our applause for right now. And we also have had several opportunities to hear from our equipping minister, Bill Nelson. We're grateful for his work that's partially funded by the Lilly Foundation grant. And then Deb Hess is his administrative assistant. She also is funded partly out of our Lilly grant, and she is the person you could call in our office to help with this. And then I want to give thanks to God for our support staff, who are all in the back, who don't like to come up front. So I just want to say, we got to move the slides ahead. I wasn't paying attention. So there's Bill, there's Deb, and then these are our support staff. So Carla's on the left, Tammy's in the middle. She serves as the Assembly Planning Coordinator. Carla works with paying bills and with candidacy. Tammy supports the bishop and works with the Assembly. Caitlin receives gifts as they come in and works with our many programs. And Kristen Bakeberg is our communications person and supports Larry as well. And so I'd like to have you give a hand to our staff for their ministry. We're privileged to serve with a staff of all of you all who are synod ministers, but we're also supported by governance people who support us and work with us and carry a lot of the load, and we're grateful. Here endeth my report.